The American Old West wasn't just gunsmoke, stagecoach robberies, whiskey saloons, and dusty cattle trails. It was also full of bizarre, hilarious, and unbelievably strange slang that modern ears can barely make sense of. Cowboys, miners, gamblers, lawmen, gunslingers, and frontier women all had their own language, and some of it sounds downright insane today. These phrases were born from rough living, wild humor, danger around every corner, and a culture unlike anything America would ever see again. Get ready, because you're about to discover 40 of the weirdest slang expressions ever used on the frontier, and some of them might shock you. If you want more Old West history like this, don't forget to leave a comment below and tell me which slang term surprised you the most. And make sure you subscribe to the channel for more American Old West facts every single week. Many people try to imagine what daily life actually felt like in the American Old West. One of the best ways to understand that world is through the slang and expressions people used. Frontier language puts you directly into the mindset of cowboys, ranch hands, prospectors, gamblers, and saloon-goers. Their speech reflected wide-open plains, long workdays, dusty trails, and a rough-and-tumble freedom that was unlike any other era in U.S. history. The Old West is often romanticized today, especially in movies, magazines, and dime novel fiction. However, the real frontier was much more complex than pop culture ever showed. Slang was shaped by regional influences, cultures mixing together, immigrant languages, and the realities of surviving in remote settlements far away from established cities. The vocabulary people used became a cultural identity marker, a way of belonging to their environment and their community. Much of this slang came from practical needs. People described weather, horses, cattle, saloons, card games, railroad life, and mining camps in short, colorful phrases that were quick to say and easy to understand. Friday night in a frontier saloon meant you might paint your nose, instead of simply saying you were going out for a drink. You might say you were feased rather than excited. These terms sound odd today, but they made perfect sense to the locals living through it at the time. American slang also evolved dramatically over generations, from the 1700s through the Civil War period and into the Great Depression. Each era left behind new phrases, new humor, and new expressions shaped by the shifting landscape of work, technology, and travel. Even the hobo culture of the early 20th century developed its own language as people traveled across the country seeking opportunity. Surprisingly, many of these old expressions still feel fresh today, and some could even return to modern vocabulary because they carried personality, charm, and humor. Old West slang is not just entertainment, it is a living link to American frontier heritage. When we study these terms, we get a clearer picture of how people actually talked, joked, worked, and interacted on the far edge of civilization. You're about to explore some of the most unusual and fascinating Wild West phrases ever spoken, expressions that can bring a touch of the frontier right into modern everyday life. Highfalutin. This term referred to someone who acted overly important or full of themselves. In the Old West, many frontier folks had little patience for bragging or showing off because life on the plains demanded humility, teamwork, and grit. Calling someone highfalutin was a humorous way to bring them back down to earth. Backdoor trots. This was a humorous slang expression used when someone had an upset stomach and needed to run to the outhouse quickly. Frontier diets were inconsistent, and food preservation was difficult before refrigeration. So this situation was not uncommon for travelers, pioneers, and cowboys drifting from camp to camp. Catawampus. This word describes something that was crooked, out of place, or just plain off-center. Settlers often used scrap wood, uneven boards, and improvised construction materials, so things on the frontier were frequently catawampus. The term reflected a world where perfection was simply not realistic. Leaky mouth. This phrase meant someone who talked too much or could not keep a secret. Frontier communication relied heavily on word of mouth, so gossip traveled fast in small towns, mining camps, and saloons. A leaky mouth could stir trouble socially. Rumors could move faster than telegraphs. Higgledy-piggledy. This expression described confusion or disorder. It fit perfectly into Old West life, where cattle stampedes, shifting railroad schedules, and gold rush chaos could turn everything upside down unexpectedly at any moment. Prairie coal. This was slang for dried cow patties used as fuel for cooking or heating. With very little timber available in prairie regions, pioneers depended on this natural resource to survive through cold nights, especially before towns developed reliable wood supply chains. Wobblin' jaw, another term for someone who talked endlessly or could not stop telling stories. The frontier was filled with long evenings, long rides, and idle time. Talking became a pastime, and some individuals became known more for conversation than action. Four-flusher. This expression describes someone who tried to appear more successful or trustworthy than they really were. It originally grew out of card-playing culture, but in daily life it came to identify anyone who exaggerated wealth, status, or honesty. Barkin' irons, a colorful nickname for pistols, often used jokingly to describe firearms carried openly on the hip. Guns were tools on the frontier, not just symbols, and naming them creatively became part of the language and humor of the culture. Gutter snipe. This term referred to a homeless child who lived on the edge of town society. During westward expansion, many young people traveled alone or became separated from family due to poverty or migration. The word reflected a difficult side of frontier life rarely shown in Hollywood westerns. Barking at a knot. This phrase meant someone was wasting time or putting effort into something that would never accomplish anything. In a frontier world where every hour mattered, especially for ranch hands, miners, and settlers, spending energy on pointless tasks was easy to recognize, and people had to be practical. Raising sand. This expression describes stirring up noise, creating mischief, or causing trouble among others. Old West communities were close-knit, and when someone began raising sand, it usually meant the peace of the town was suddenly disrupted, even if the moment wasn't serious. Toad strangler. This humorous term referred to a very heavy rainstorm. Pioneer life depended on weather because crops, travel, cattle drives, and mining operations were all affected by sudden downpours. A toad strangler was a way to describe a rain so intense that the ground could barely absorb it. California widow. This phrase meant a woman whose husband had traveled far away, often to seek gold or new opportunity, but they were still legally married. During the migration westward, many men left home for months or years chasing fortune, leaving wives behind to manage household and family responsibilities alone. 5 beans in the wheel. This meant loading only 5 cartridges into the cylinder of a 6-shot revolver for safety reasons. Many frontiersmen left one chamber empty so the hammer rested on an open slot instead of a cartridge. This cautious method was part of everyday firearm handling in the late 1800s. Scamper juice. This was slang for whiskey or strong alcohol. Since liquor was common in saloons, mining camps, and cattle towns, it became a regular part of frontier social life. People used playful names like this to soften the reputation of drinking and make the moment sound more humorous. Painting your nose. This was another way of saying someone was out drinking, especially socially. Instead of saying they were getting intoxicated, they would call it painting their nose, which added a more light-hearted tone and made the activity sound like an evening celebration instead of reckless behavior. Lincoln skins. This referred to the paper currency used in the era. United States greenbacks, named for President Abraham Lincoln's portrait. Cash became more common after the Civil War, and people in the West adopted slang that linked money to practical, everyday speech. Bag of nails. This phrase described a situation where everything was going wrong at the same time. Frontier life was unpredictable, and problems could appear suddenly. Broken wagons, poor weather, sick livestock, or lost supplies. So this phrase captured the feeling of complete chaos. Black-eyed Susan. This was another creative nickname for a 6-shot pistol. Nicknames for weapons were common because they were familiar tools of the time. People enjoyed giving them colorful labels, much like cowboys named their horses, saddles, or favorite gear on the open trail. slum guzzling. This word was used to describe sneaky, dishonest, or deceptive behavior. On the frontier, trust mattered because communities were isolated and survival often depended on cooperation. So labeling someone slum guzzling meant they were not playing fair with others and could not be counted on during daily dealings. Blatherskite. This described a person who talked endlessly, usually without saying anything useful. The Old West had long evenings in bunkhouses, trail rides, and mining camps, and conversation was common. But someone who, rambling without purpose, quickly became irritating. Nibbler. This term referred to a petty thief who took small items rather than committing large theft. Frontier towns often lacked formal law enforcement, so smaller offenses were common among drifters, travelers, and people passing through who tried to take advantage of opportunities in subtle ways. Of the first water. This phrase meant that something was of outstanding quality or superior value. It originally related to gem grading, like diamonds of pure clarity, and this expression carried over into Western speech to describe something or someone truly exceptional. Beetle crushers. This was a humorous nickname for feet, usually large heavy boots worn by cowboys, miners, and pioneers. Footwear was crucial equipment on the trail, and colorful language like this added character and a humor to daily conversation in rough terrain. Greasy belly. This nickname was used for the cook in a cattle drive or cowboy camp. The camp cook held tremendous importance. They were responsible for feeding the crew, managing supplies, and keeping morale high. Despite the playful name, the position was respected because everyone relied on them. Hair in the butter. This was a phrase used to describe a sensitive or delicate situation. In an era where food preparation and supplies were precious, anything spoiling a meal was a serious problem. So this phrase became a metaphor for a moment where something small created a much bigger issue. Honeyfuggled. This meant someone was tricked or persuaded through smooth talk, charm, or flattery. Many traveling salesmen, gamblers, and deal makers in the West were well known for using sweet words to get what they wanted. So people developed this colorful description. Pie rooting. This term was slang for intimate romantic relations. The West had its own coded language to discuss relationships and affection discreetly, especially in public places where people preferred not to speak directly. Get the mitten. This phrase meant being rejected by someone you hoped to court or impress. If a man received the mitten, it meant the woman turned him down. Romantic relationships were complex on the frontier because many towns had far more men than women, making courtship sometimes difficult and competitive. See the elephant. This expression meant traveling into town or visiting a new place for the very first time. Many settlers used it when experiencing something exciting or unfamiliar, especially in an era where new environments, new towns, and new landscapes could feel larger than life. Crawl his hump. This phrase meant someone was trying to provoke or irritate another person on purpose. Frontier communities were tight spaces socially, and it didn't take much for tension to build when people were already tired from long days of labor, ranch work, or trail travel. Fork a hoss. This simply meant mounting and riding a horse. Riding was not a luxury on the frontier. It was daily transportation, a work tool, and sometimes even part of a person's identity. Knowing how to ride well was considered a basic skill for survival. Coffee boiler. This described a person who avoided work or did not contribute to tasks at hand. On the frontier, everyone's effort mattered. Ranch hands, settlers, cowboys, miners. So calling someone a coffee boiler was a way of pointing out that they sat around instead of helping. Excuse me, ma'am. This phrase referred to a sudden bump or dip in a road or trail that caused a wagon or horse rider to jolt unexpectedly. Early roads were rough, uneven, and unpredictable, so settlers created lighthearted language to describe these bumps. Not galley west. This meant completely throwing something into confusion or disorder. Frontier life could become chaotic quickly, and this colorful phrase captured the idea of turning everything upside down suddenly, whether plans, supplies, or daily routines. Calf slobbers. This humorous phrase referred to the foamy topping on a pie. Food was both precious and celebrated on the frontier, and cooks enjoyed naming parts of dishes in creative, playful ways, especially when baking brought a rare moment of comfort and joy. Moldy grubs. This was a negative nickname for traveling show performers. Traveling entertainers were common during the 1800s because towns were isolated and shows offered rare excitement, but many locals viewed performers with suspicion if they moved around too often. 7 by 9. This term describes something common, average, or unimpressive. In an era that celebrated craftsmanship and skill, from blacksmithing to saddle making, calling something 7 by 9 meant it did not stand out and had no special quality. Fees. This word meant a feeling of excitement or high anticipation. The Old West carried moments of suspense, cattle drives beginning, prospectors finding gold dust, steam trains rolling into stations, and people needed short, sharp slang to express that electric burst of energy. The American Old West still holds a powerful place in the imagination today, and these slang terms remind us that frontier life was not only about gunfights, cattle trails, mining towns, stagecoaches, and dusty saloons. It was also about culture, humor, identity, and language. People living in this era developed their own linguistic codes not only because it was practical, but because it gave them personality, a sense of belonging, and a way to communicate their unique lifestyle to others who lived the same daily challenges. The slang they created wasn't random. It came from survival, travel, weather, livestock, food shortages, gambling houses, long trail nights, and dealing with unpredictable situations that the modern world simply doesn't experience in the same way. This strange vocabulary was shaped by hundreds of overlapping influences. Settlers from the East Coast, Southern immigrants, European newcomers, Spanish and Mexican cultural influences, Native American presence, railroad workers, Civil War veterans, cattle drivers, mining crews, and the constantly shifting population of wanderers heading west to find something better than what they left behind. All of those cultures collided in frontier towns, mining settlements, railroad stops, boom markets, cattle ranches, military posts, and makeshift camps. Out of that collision came slang, and that slang became one of the most powerful fingerprints of the Western frontier. Movies, novels, documentaries, and pop culture often make the Old West look simplified. But the truth is, frontier communities had their own language system that was extremely expressive, creative, sarcastic, humorous, and deeply tied to their environment. These phrases were social tools. They helped break tension, build relationships, express frustration, tease friends, describe weather, signal danger, and turn daily struggles into something easier to laugh about. In many ways, this slang helped people cope with an unpredictable world. Even though these slang terms sound strange or silly today, they carry historical meaning. They show us how people thought, how they joked, how they communicated, and how they turned their everyday reality into something that felt uniquely theirs. Many of these expressions may never return to modern speech, but they are still important because they are a direct piece of historical evidence of how life actually felt for the ordinary men and women who lived out west. So now that you've seen 40 of the most unusual, bizarre, and fascinating slang terms from the American Old West, which one shocked you the most? Which one made you laugh? Which one could you see becoming popular again today? I want you to leave a comment below and tell me your favorite weird slang word from this list, because some of these may deserve a second life in today's vocabulary. And if you love learning about the real history of the frontier, not the Hollywood version, not the myth, but the strange, surprising, unpredictable, and unbelievably interesting truth, then make sure you subscribe to the channel right now. Because there are still countless stories, characters, legends, facts, mysteries, and forgotten details from the American Old West that most people have never heard of. And we are just getting started. The West was wilder, stranger, more complex, and more human than most history books ever show. and there is so much more to explore together. Subscribe now and saddle up, because we're heading back into the frontier again soon.